Hi, folks. Welcome, welcome. We are just a couple minutes away from starting today's webinar, so thanks for your patience and looking forward to connecting with you. We'll just be waiting another probably 3 minutes to get started. Please make yourself comfortable, grab a cup of coffee. Hey, folks, if you're just joining, welcome, welcome. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. Welcome, folks. If you're just joining us, we're going to get started in just about 30 seconds. Thank you for being here today and looking forward to conversating with you about CMMI data. All right, folks, out of respect for your time, we are 1 minute past, so let's get started. So welcome everybody to today's conversation around data-driven confidence, elevating enterprise value with CMMI data. My name is Chris DeMale. I'm Vice President with CMMI, and I look forward to sharing with you the content from two of our key partners for today's webinar. If we can please click forward the slide. So here's today's presenters. I already introduced myself. I've now been with the CMMI Institute for 8 years, and my role is to support delivery of our content to folks like yourself around the world. I'm also being joined by two esteemed colleagues. Dr. Sankaran is a globally recognized expert in business performance and CMMI and has been a lead appraiser for CMMI since 2005 with a top consulting firm. He's also a member of the CMMI AI working group. So thank you for being here today, Dr. Sankaran.
Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely. And I'm also very pleased to introduce everybody to Mr. Teenu. He is a CMMI lead appraiser as well with a top consulting firm. He has over 30 years of experience and has led global engagements across various industry sectors for driving process excellence and business transformation programs. So these two gentlemen will be presenting today's content on CMMI data. Thank you for
Perfect.
being here. Absolutely. So let me go ahead and review today's agenda. We'll be talking about what is CMMI. We'll be talking about the data amidst the global ecosystem and why this is very important. We'll talk about data management, governance, and analytics. We'll be touching on data storage, data repository, metadata, key concepts around how CMMI data can support your needs. We'll be talking about data architecture and the model. We'll also be touching on organizational data capability. After all, capability is the C in CMMI. We'll be talking about data glossary and data quality and data cleansing. And finally, we'll be reserving a Q&A at the end. So please don't hesitate to use the tool, enter your Q&A, and we'll ensure that your important questions get answered. Next slide, please. Thank you. Let's briefly talk about what is CMMI. Right? So CMMI has a long and well-recognized history spanning decades. CMMI Performance Solutions is a proven outcome-based performance improvement model providing faster, better, and cheaper results. Right? And what's so unique about CMMI is we all know the old adage, it's very difficult to do things fast, good, and cheap. But CMMI is the model that allows organizations to do that, and it's provable, which we can talk about in some detail. CMMI is the globally accepted standard that improves and enhances organizational capability and performance, and it sets the bar for assessing organizational maturity. I will quote one of our many esteemed partners to say, when you need to crawl and then get to walking, that's one thing. But when you know how to walk and you want to run, that's when CMMI will enable your organization to make that transition and to really enhance that performance. And then CMMI provides a prioritized and evolutionary capability and maturity pathway to build and implement new capabilities that deliver measurable results, right? So as each of us on today's call is thinking about how they can enhance and improve their experience with their organization, those keywords, capability, evolutionary, maturity, leading to measurable results is exactly what we're thinking about here today. And you don't need to take our word for it. Through our partners, we deliver over 5,000 appraisals annually. We work with over 13,000 appraised organizations in over 50 countries and consistently growing year after year. Next slide, please. And so what can CMMI do? So when you're thinking about the purpose of today's call, what is it about CMMI that caused you to be interested in listening to what we have to say? Here's what we've got, right? So CMMI is around capability and maturity model integration. That's what it stands for, is a globally recognized process improvement framework. It is developed and maintained by the organization I work for, the CMMI Institute. It is designed to be sector agnostic, applicable across industries, no matter where you work, no matter where you consult, no matter what you deliver. It incorporates best practices from academic, government, and industry practices. It helps organizations improve performance, quality, and efficiency. So it touches on a broad range of potential issues that you're looking to address. And the current version is CMMI 3.0, featuring 8 domain-specific models, including CMMI Data. That's where this comes in today, which is a focus on accessing and building the data program within your organization. With that, I would like to pass things over to Dr. Sankaran, who I understand is the first of our subject matter experts that will be taking over today's content. So if I've got that correct, Dr. Sankaran, please feel free to take it away.
Sure. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much for setting that context in a very lovely manner. Thanks to CMI Institute and leadership team for giving us yet another opportunity to be participating in such wonderful webinars, especially on key concepts. Now, whenever we talk about data and the findings, I can't avoid this important quote that came from Edwards Deming, quality guru, who used to say, "In God we trust, all others must bring data." And this is something that we always start with the paradigm that that's how we want to look at enterprise holding data. In the current context, before I start sharing some of the interesting findings that are coming from many, many surveys, questionnaires, and discussions, the sentiments from the market with regard to data, everyone seems to be on a common page, friends, in terms of looking at data as the new core. In fact, data has become a definitive asset in the modern enterprise landscape, and it has fundamentally shifted from being a peripheral information technology asset to the irreplaceable backbone of organization function. In fact, it's very interesting to see majority of the clients that we go back and discuss in the current context of technological interventions, everyone is talking about Gen AI, agentic AI, and in fact, surprisingly, some of the companies have also started talking about quantum plus AI, neuromorphic computing, byte coding, variety of things have started coming in. And they are unfolding in its own formats and differentiates. They all will be in different forms. But everybody seems to be talking about data as the engine that powers three things for an enterprise. Strategic decision is one, fueling technological innovation, and underpins rigorous risk management and compliance efforts. In fact, the competitive distinction between market leaders and the rest is now defined not just by sheer volume of data being collected, but by the organization's ability to seamlessly embed and empower data leadership at the core of its strategy. This is exactly the reason why we need, as a company, we need support of a framework. We need support of a model that can help put together the data infrastructure and ecosystem, right from planning to monitoring to doing the governance to data collection to ensure data quality and processing data for taking key decision making. There has to be a framework or a model that can guide the enterprise throughout, and that can result in successful enterprises progressing beyond the archaic practice of just requiring data leaders to constantly build internal business cases to prove the value of data initiatives. In fact, instead, the data leadership is fully integrated into the fabric of four things: product development, finance, marketing, and operations. All of these, friends, are likely to bring in the acceleration. Now, when I start looking at some of these survey, I try to put together different sources of survey results. And majority of the people, when it comes to data, definitely talked about data quality challenges, significant cost that companies are incurring because of poor data quality. And you'll be surprised to note that almost data incidents is costing close to about $100,000. Now, what are the reasons for this? Majority of the organizations and the respondents are saying it could be related to manual processes for data quality management. Still, we are in the era of AI. And therefore, we now know what we want to do with AI to bring in or accelerate data quality. From a data-driven perspective, organization, enterprise level, from there looking at the maturity gap, every organization wants to be data-driven. In fact, every leadership team aspires to have their organization a data-driven culture. But aspiration versus the actual capability. How are we acquiring that capability? Can a model like CMMI for data help in putting the right set of culture so that it can slowly minimize and eliminate the cultural barriers and bring in and steer the organization towards data driven? Variety of challenges seems to be coming up. One, confidence level itself appears to be low in implementing data driven decisions. Some of the CXOs are even saying we worry about data sovereignty, data quality. Can I rely on the data? Is the data dependable? When these questions comes, finally the leadership is settling down to, okay, let the decision be taken based on intuition rather than data, because I can't guarantee whether the data quality is reliable or dependable. Now look at some of the trends that are also taking place. What seems to be the priorities? Focused efforts therefore would come for data quality and governance. Now, obviously, with such a huge cost, with about $12.9 million per year on an average, is seems to be the cost of poor data quality sentiments across the industry. In fact, several business initiatives are failing due to poor data quality, and that business initiatives numbers are pretty alarming when we say 40%. And that then imagine the outcomes of these business initiatives, which are dependent on the business objectives, and the top line and bottom line of the company gets terribly disturbed. Now, when we talk about those aspects, let's also look at the impact of poor data quality. In fact, there is a section in the CMMI model which talks about what is the consequence of poor data quality, that clearly lists out what could be the problem related to analytics, because every leadership wants to have a predictable delivery models, profitable delivery. Now, how do we get there? And if data quality is not paid enough attention to, what could be the challenge? Almost companies are facing the financial loss of about $15 million annually if the data quality is not taken care of. Almost several business leaders believe that data lineage certainly requires urgent upgrades. Data lineage is all from the origin to the transformation and the point of use of data, how much it impacts on the overall business from the revenue perspective. Similarly, the trends, the futuristic trends, even the current and future trends are slowly heading towards how some of the leadership team wanted to really prioritize data management. 73% of their focus they actually wanted to, and they were very serious about it. In some of these conversations we had, and they were visibly saying that we really wanted to spend time and focus on data management, because what data gives us, what data tells us is something which is very important, and just the intuition and thinking and feeling may not comprehend as important delivery of business value to our customers. And now the data quality and governance importance, the essence is actually growing, friends. It's about, in 2022 we talked about 20%, of course with various aspects, but today it is now heading towards, by next year we are going to see 60% focus is going to be coming on data quality and governance importance. That also includes investments. Some of the companies are even saying we don't mind investing in protecting data sovereignty in our company, because it's not only just for compliance purpose, for decision making, and also standing up to demonstrate regulatory requirements and compliance around it. Of course, we can't avoid AI. And also remember, for AI also data is the raw material. And can we use AI to improve data quality? Why not? Should we explore different tools, different ways of looking at that? How do we bring in the cost and the human error? How do we minimize it through automation? And now the adoption of data mesh and data fabric architecture to break the silos so that we can provide seamless access to data across platforms. And look at on focus clearly coming on cloud economics. So friends, it's a very, very interesting journey that we are in the current modern times. In fact, thanks to AI, it is making the companies to realize the seriousness of data and how data needs to be consumed, how data needs to be used in the context of business as well as operations. As we talk about some of these findings, I also wanted to draw the attention as we move towards getting into CMMI for data to understand what variety of practice areas. There are actually 17 core practice areas which are technical details about data, and there are one data related and two data related practice areas, which is data management and data quality. So put together, whatever we are going to talk about, 5 C's, they are all primarily going to come together into reality by specifically mentioning what are the technical clauses in the model that can help organization to benchmark their data management related practices and ensure the data sovereignty, data management, and making sure the right set of decision making coming up. That's what typically the model also, we have spoken about different areas. We will see very soon about it. And what are those essentially going to talk about? Today, we have so much of regulatory requirements coming up. GDPR has been there for quite some time. Now in India, DPDP Act has also come in. I'm sure every country has their own regulatory requirements on how data can be used. And it all starts with consent. Data permission must be taken up from the key stakeholders and has to be told to them what are we going to do with that data. That's going to be very important. The stakeholders can be internal, can be external. Next, clarity of purpose. What do we want to do with the data? What are our intentions at the end of the day? So let's be very clear. What are we trying to say in terms of when we collect data, when we analyze data, and what do we want to do with the data, and then come back and put the right set of systems in place. This is also spoken about extremely well in some of the technical details of the entire CMI model to bring in clarity through measurement, and managing performance. And as we see in terms of clarity and consent, it's also very important to look at the variations control. Inconsistency in data or its usage within can reflect on the poor responsible analytics capability of the company. So therefore, is the data being collected uniformly from across the organization? Remember, inclusive approach and then equitable, as we refer to in ESG also, or diversity, equity, and inclusion. And is that being consumed and decisions taken uniformly across the organization? So that's the fourth to see consistency, which is very important. Now we look at the control and transparency. Obviously, data is such a subject where, who will have access to this? What's the degree of authentication? What's the level of visibility we provide to the organization, the key stakeholders in terms of what are we going to do with the data? So control and transparency. And last but not the least is all about confidentiality. It's just realizing what is the harm if a data breach takes place, what harm it can cause to our internal stakeholders as well as to our external stakeholders. What could be the consequences? So time has come to look at data beyond the dashboard and start looking at, okay, what seems to be the impact of these data? That's how in the entire model, in fact, some years back, we had something called data management maturity model. The cardinal principles of all those models is now into CMMI for data, clearly carving out what exactly are the principles, philosophies a company can focus in order to acquire higher capability as far as data management is concerned. Now, when we saw 5 C's, a lot of people when they are getting trained on AI, they keep learning 7 V's, 5 V's on data paradigm. What we have attempted here to do is to put 10 V's so that to the extent possible, we could be exhausted. All right. Of course, there may be more V's that can get added, but for a data, what's going to be very important is all these V's, starting with visualization. Today, we use variety of tools. All right, whether it is Power BI or Tableau, and every month new tools are getting released. And some of the tools have prediction capabilities, some of the tools have got dashboard capabilities. So visualization, visual representations to take decisions is one aspect of the data paradigm. The second aspect is the speed with which we will get data. What's how fast we can get the data so that that can also have a relationship with the decision that we are going to take. The third aspect is, will we get different types of data? Because if I don't get different types of data, then we will not be able to conclude anything. Just to go back to the earlier example of pandemic crisis, every state used to report how many people are contracting the virus. And then they would come back and say, here the number is very high. That's because the test is very high. So are we collecting data not only on the infected case, but also the number of tests being done? So are we looking at different types of data? When it's coming to the organization, different projects being executed, how many projects are executed on time, delivered on time with good quality? And there also lies the complexity of the project. So we have to see the balance of the duration of the project, the product they are working on, the constant requirement changes, as well as the complexity involved, so that put together we can then make it comparable. That's what we typically talk about. Are we getting variety of data? When we talk about variety of data, the next is variability. Obviously, data also has its own consistency, inconsistency challenges, as we saw earlier in one of the C. So are we looking at the variability of the data? How do we control them? Then, will we get enough data? Of course, in the parlance of statistical and quantitative methods, pattern of data, volumes of data will give us a good pattern we could study, or we could apply alternative modes of simulation or a probabilistic model with the available volumes of data. But still, the volume gives me a message of what pattern seems to be coming up. Today, you can see hyper personalization of services. When we simply go back to the mobile phone and start browsing for certain products continuously, obviously the AI algorithm recognizes it. So there are certain patterns, twice, thrice, and then it starts pushing similar such product. So obviously volume matters to that extent. Next, today, because the data is available, a lot of people are used on a lighter note, keep saying nothing is secret in this world. Everything is available, and unfortunately, some of them are even available publicly. Yeah. So vulnerability. And it's absolutely essential for the enterprises to exercise adequate caution on how do they maintain sensitive data, personal data of their stakeholders. Here, I'm not differentiating stakeholders as either customers or employees, both internal and external stakeholders. How are those data protected and they are following the confidentiality related policies? What's the vulnerability of the data? Then validity. Okay, how dependable is the data? Okay, to what extent we can rely on the data to take a decision on the validity of the data. Volatility. That's another very interesting part where looking at the kind of data that we are looking at dynamic data, static data. When the data becomes dynamic, how relevant it is going to be thereafter. So how should we start looking at the behavior of the data itself so that we can rely on them and take action? So volatility typically talks about understanding the nuances of data and how fast it can change. While we all talked about data quality, in fact, that's a separate practice area in the CMI model. That stands for the ninth V, which is veracity, which is nothing but accuracy of the data. How accurate is this data? And can we rely on them when we are trying to build relationship and look at the predictable delivery? And all put together, finally, value back to the stakeholders. The recipient, the end customer should receive the value what we are typically talking about within the organization, and not only the end customers but also within the organization when we are using the data. So data can always provide some interesting one. I'm reminded of a very interesting quote which Ronald Coase used to say: if you torture the data long enough, it will confess to anything. So do we want to really look at not torture the people, but torture the data so that it can actually, we can derive lots of interesting facts. Because again, going back to what Deming says, without data, we are just another person with an opinion. Do we want to run our enterprise with all opinionated views, which are not substantiated by data, where there are surprises as an outcome of the decision that can come through? So with that note, friends, let's embark on the data management expedition in our learning process today in the webinar and try to look at what CMMI model typically talks about, to what level of depth it goes into, and how will it prepare a company to benchmark their practices so that they can constantly keep building confidence to all their stakeholders around. In the current context, we can see there are too many stakeholders. Just to give an example, customer, third party, supplier, vendor, our own employees, right? And also regulators. Every company has got a variety of internal, external stakeholders, and data is the only way the enterprise can stand up and then build that credibility through the trust they want to look at. Therefore, benchmarking the practices with the preferable model and then go on an evolutionary improvement path from CMI, maybe level 3, level 4, level 5, level 1 to 5, that can typically put the right set of systems in place for the enterprise. So friends, with that note, I will now hand it over to my colleague, Teenu Puri, who will walk us through in terms of the technical aspects of data and also what are the practice areas that are there in CMI for data. Over to you, Teenu.
Thank you so much, Dr. Shankaran and Chris, for setting the context and setting the stage for further discussion on this subject. Greetings to all the viewers and listeners. Indeed, a great pleasure and to share a detailed perspective on this contemporary subject, which is relevant to almost every sector and organization worldwide. And of course, my gratitude to ISACA and CMMI Institute for this unique opportunity. So friends, so we do take this discussion forward and let's deep dive into further details on this sector agnostic subject on data management and how CMMI data model adoption can significantly benefit and enable the business needs of any organization. So Dr. Shankaran mentioned a couple of very interesting adages. I have a few more for you to set the context. Uh, so. From across the globe in the context of data, there are a couple of very famous adages, starting with they say data is the architect of competitive advantage. They also say data is the accuracy of the digital age, and then they say information is power, but data is the engine that drives it. Data is the compass of the global economy. Without it we are sailing blind. They also say markets run on trust, but trust now runs on data. Then they say the next superpower isn't a country, it is whoever controls the cleanest data. They also say data turns complexity into clarity. And lastly, data is the engine of globalization. Fuel it wisely. So, friends, these adages are self-explanatory and they indeed underscore the criticality and the significance of data in the modern times. Next slide, please. So, let's quickly look at the data amidst the global ecosystem. So, friends, if we look at how data is central to the global economy ecosystem, probably let's have a look at first the key elements or the factors or the blocks in the digital economy that corroborate the fact that data is the most critical and one of the highest common factors at the center of the ecosystem. The global economy is a vast ecosystem, of course, and data sits at the center as the most critical enabler because every component depends on it for value creation, decision making, and innovation. So, these are some of the key elements that you can see. The first is the digital infrastructure, of course. Now, digital infrastructure would typically be, say, starting with the cloud context, cloud computing. What would be the infrastructure elements? We talk about data storage, processing, and scalability, which heavily depend on the cloud platforms. And then networks and connectivity as a part of the cloud context, wherein high-speed internet, 5G, IoT typically enables the real-time data exchange globally. Then you can also see here platforms and marketplaces. Typically, that includes the first one is the e-commerce platforms. In fact, we all use multiple e-commerce platforms that thrive on consumer data for personalization and pricing. We also have digital service platforms like software as a service, fintech services, and streamlining services that rely on behavioral and transactional data. Here you can also see analytics and artificial intelligence, typically starting with the big data analytics that converts the raw data into actionable insights. And we also have, of course, machine learning and artificial intelligence, wherein algorithms learn from the data to predict the trends, they automate the tasks, and personalize experiences. Then we have here cybersecurity and trust. Dr. Shankaran spoke about it though. Data privacy and compliance, GDPR and other such regulations, they emphasize data protection. And of course, trust frameworks. Markets run on the trust, and trust now runs on secure and clean data, as we mentioned earlier. Then, of course, we are all a part of digital payments and currency ecosystem. We have all kinds of fintechs and blockchains. Digital transactions and cryptocurrencies are data driven. And then, of course, as I mentioned about the payment gateways already. There are global supply chains wherein the logistics and trade data enables visibility, optimization, and resilience in the global supply networks. And then, of course, there is a element of predictive analytics. Then, of course, we have innovation and R&D, product development. In that context, there are data-driven insights that fuel innovation cycles, and of course, personalization. Lastly, we can see here governance and policy, which would basically entail digital regulations. Dr. Shankaran spoke about data sovereignty. So this data sovereignty and ethical AI policies, they shape the ecosystem primarily. And at the highest level, there's economic planning. Governments use data for macroeconomic decisions. So all in all, therefore, data is indeed at the center of the global ecosystem. Slide, please. Right. So, data management and digital economy. So, now why is data management so significant amidst the contemporary digital economy? So, basically, data management is absolutely critical in the modern times for several reasons. One of them is data being a strategic asset. Now, in the digital economy, data is the new currency, as we mentioned earlier. Businesses rely on data driven insights for decision making, innovation, and competitive advantage. Proper management ensures data is accurate, accessible, and actionable, enabling organizations to leverage it effectively. Then, of course, there is explosion of data volume. I'm sure all of you, in the context of your roles, you can relate to this explosion of the data volume worldwide. With IoT, with AI, with social media and cloud computing, data is growing exponentially. Without the robust data management, organizations they would face data silos, duplication, and inefficiencies, which would eventually hinder productivity and scalability. Then we have an element of regulatory compliance. As we mentioned, laws like GDPR and India's DPDP, that Dr. Shankaran mentioned, they impose strict requirements on data privacy and security. And eventually, poor data governance can lead to legal penalties, reputational damage, and loss of customer trust. Then, of course, cybersecurity and risk mitigation. Data breaches are costly and damaging. Effective data management includes security protocols, encryption, and access controls to protect sensitive information. Then, of course, enabling advanced technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and analytics that depend on high quality and well structured data. Customer experience and personalization. Of course, businesses they use data to deliver personalized experiences and predict customer needs. And as Dr. Shankaran mentioned as well, that poor data quality leads to inaccurate targeting and diminished customer satisfaction. Lastly, operational efficiency, streamlined data processes reduce redundancy, storage costs, and processing time, improving overall efficiency. So, all in all, in short, data management is the backbone, indeed, backbone of digital transformation. It ensures that organizations can harness data responsibly and effectively to innovate, comply with the regulations, and stay competitive. Next slide, please. Yes, so friends, the most promising maturity model, CMMI, of course, capability maturity model integration, which is from CMMI Institute and ISACA. It has CMMI data as one of the 8 domains available for adoption by any organization worldwide. Now, the CMMI model has 8 domains, as I mentioned. What are these 8 domains? They are development, services, security, people, data, of course, safety, suppliers, and virtual. CMMI model in particular, which is a current subject, this is a unique maturity model exclusively for data management. This is applicable for any industry sector, regardless of the business. The target audience of CMMI data are all organizations that want to harness the power of data for their business. CMMI data addresses the typical pain areas of disparate silos, lack of formal processes or a clear strategy, lack of leadership support, and a little confidence in the data integrity. Eventually, the expected benefits of CMMI data adoption are, of course, improved decision making based on an organized data management, improved efficiency and reduction of the costs, improved data confidence, and of course, increasing the effectiveness of data governance programs. CMMI data has 2 domain specific practice areas. One is data management and data quality. Of course, we will be looking into the details of these practice areas in a short while. And of course, there are 17 core practice areas, as Dr. Shankaran mentioned earlier. These 17 core practice areas are applicable to all the domains. For example, if we apply the planning practice area in the context of CMMI data, it would entail the planning in the context of data management and data quality. The adoption of the CMMI data model would help an organization build, sustain, and benchmark their maturity on a scale of level 1 through level 5. So let's now look at the details of the various elements of data management and data quality. Next slide, please. So friends, let's look at some of the key concepts of data management, data governance, and data analytics. These are some of the basic aspects and the practices related to data management. Now, how data management differs from data governance and data analytics. Basically, data management, what is data management? It is basically the operational process of handling data throughout its life cycle, starting with the collection to storage, to organizing the data, data integration, security, and the backup. Data management focuses on how data is stored, moved, and maintained. And the goal, of course, is to make data usable and accessible for business operations and analytics. Then we have data governance. What is data governance? Is basically the strategic framework of policies, standards, and rules that define who owns the data, what rules apply, and how it should be used. And the focus is on the why and the who part in terms of the ownership, the compliance, and the accountability. And then, of course, the key application eventually culminates into data analytics. So, what is data analytics? It is a process of analyzing the data into extract insights, trends, and patterns for decision making. And of course, the focus is on what can we learn from the data. So, all in all, how all three of them relate. Basically, data governance sets the rules, data management enforces these rules, and data analytics uses the data. So, I mean, we can safely say that without governance, data may be unreliable. Without management, governance remains theoretical. And without analysis, data has no business value. Slide, please. So, let's look at further some of the basics of data management uh, in terms of some of the fundamental aspects around the subject. So, eventually, data management is applicable across the organization and at the work level or at the project level. So this means it is applicable both at the enterprise level as well as the localized context. And then, of course, the data management maturity. In fact, the entire CMMI data model based on the maturity of the data management processes, which we will be discussing in detail in a short while. Security, of course, is one of the key requirements of data that we'll be talking about throughout this webinar. And data management as a focused function, this is one of the key hallmarks of CMMI data model, which strongly mandates and recommends to establish a dedicated and a focused function, which takes care of the entire practice. And we'll, of course, discuss about this in detail in a short while. And eventually, data management depends on and affects critical infrastructure, both the physical infrastructure and the cloud infrastructure. Next slide, please. So, data management, these are some of the key considerations before we proceed, starting with the data life cycles. Data life cycles typically entails managing the data from creation through usage, archival, and eventual disposal. Then we have data integration, which is nothing but combining data from multiple sources into a unified, consistent view. Data dictionary, a very basic concept and a practice. This is a centralized repository defining data elements, formats, and relationships. Data migration, of course, transferring data between systems while ensuring integrity and compatibility. Then there are architectural standards, guidelines for structuring and organizing data systems consistently. Data representations typically means defining how data is modeled, formatted, and visualized across the platforms. Data flows typically would be mapping and controlling how data moves between processes and systems. Data security, of course, is protecting data against unauthorized access, breaches, and corruption. Data privacy, ensuring compliance with regulations and safeguarding the personal information, as Dr. Shankaran mentioned. Data sufficiency, of course, verifying that data is complete and adequate for intended use cases. Data substitution or de-identification. This is typically about one is eliminating the redundancies and replacing sensitive data with anonymized or masked values. Data storage is equally important. Selecting and managing physical or cloud-based repositories for data retention. And last but not the least is change management. This is something very important, which means controlling and documenting modifications to data definitions or structures. In fact, there's one of the core practice areas called configuration management, which very strongly applies on the data context. Next slide, please. So if we further look at some of the core determinants of data management, uh, starting with the business objectives, any organization first needs to align the data strategies with the organization goals for eventually driving the business value. Domain would basically all about tailoring the data practices to the specific industry or functional area requirements. We already spoke about the regulatory and competitive environment, which would basically be ensuring compliance and adapting to market pressures, influencing the usage of data. Purpose, of course, is to improve the usability and accessibility of data, designing systems that make data easy to find, understand, and leverage. Capability study is something important. Again, one of the hallmarks of CMMI data as a model, which basically means that there should be continuous assessment of the organizational skills and infrastructure for effective data management. And then lastly, we have increased security and privacy needs, especially in the cloud context, which would mean implementing robust measures to protect sensitive data in distributed and cloud environments. Slide, please. Now let's look at the data management framework. Now, as we go along, I'm sure the subject gets heavy, but our endeavor would be to elucidate the concepts in a smooth manner. So the key elements of the framework are as below. Of course, the fundamental block is the vision. Typically, organization begins with defining the vision, which includes the core operating principles, goals, and objectives, and priorities that are based on a synthesis of important factors such as dependencies, perceived value, and alignment to the strategic initiatives. Then, of course, the scope of the whole adoption, for example, customer accounts, data management priorities, data quality, critical data elements such as customer master data, etc. Then, of course, what are the business benefits, the selected data management framework and how it will be used, consideration of the major gaps identified during the assessment and the closure of those gaps. And then, as I mentioned, data management as a function. What are the various roles and responsibilities? They need to be very clearly defined, including a list of the key stakeholders. Typically, nowadays, organizations have a role like chief data officer. What are the roles and responsibilities that needs to be clearly established? Who is the governing body? What are the roles and responsibilities? Who are the data owners and who are the data providers? This needs to be very clearly defined. Of course, governing principles and guidelines, establishing overarching rules and best practices for consistent data handling. Then we get on to the hardcore metadata definitions and processes. We will in a short while look at the metadata details, but eventually there has to be definition and the descriptive information that provides context for the data assets. Then, of course, sensitivity classification of the data, like public or the internal or restricted or the confidential use. Overview of the data management approach needs to be clearly laid down. Extent and scope of the data compliance approach. Testing criteria and approach, something very important. Success measures, eventually the KPIs, and what eventually makes data management adoption as effective. Data quality requirements in terms of specifying the standards for accuracy and completeness, etc. Error and exception handling standards means setting the protocols for detecting, logging, and resolving the data-related issues. Quality control checks and verification and validation. For example, for confirming that data is accurate, authentic, and fit for its intended use. Next slide, please. So, yeah, we spoke about metadata. It is one of the key concepts of data management. So, metadata, it basically increases the accessibility, objectiveness, and usability of the critical data. Metadata fundamentally provides a context and the structure, making data easier to find, interpret, and use accurately. It enables effective retrieval, usage, and the management of data assets. Eventually, it acts as an index and a guide for efficient data search, governance, and lifecycle management. There are three kinds of metadata: business metadata, technical metadata, and operational metadata. This is very well defined, and there's a very clear guideline in the CMMI data model. Eventually, metadata, which cuts across these three categories, it captures descriptive, structural, and process related details. And of course, captured and stored in data models, systems, and networks. Metadata may be captured and stored in data models, systems, networks, project documentation, operation documentation, or it could be in the list of key business terms. Then we talk about using metadata to manage the data. So first we identify the sources of existing metadata, which means locating all the systems, repositories, and processes where metadata currently resides. Then we evaluate their completeness, categorization, and properties, which would mean assessing the metadata for accuracy, coverage, classification, etc. And then eventually consolidate and enhance them into cohesive meta model, which would mean integrating the disparate metadata into a unified structure that supports governance and interoperability. Slide, please. So further, we talk about the data architecture. Again, CMMI data model is pretty detailed about the architecture. So let's look at some of the fundamental foundational drivers of data architecture. Starting with the purpose. Purpose, of course, is to ensure efficient and effective structure for consistently performing data management. Then, of course, essential for designing a well-structured technology infrastructure. This serves as the blueprint primarily for integrating data systems within the IT architecture. Then another foundational driver is the high quality and trusted data layer, which primarily ensures reliable, accurate, and consistent data as a foundation for analytics and decision making. And then, of course, lastly, we have flexible approach vis-a-vis technology obsolescence and resulting data migrations. This is one of the key fundamental inputs, and this basically enables adaptability to evolving technologies and smooth transitions during system upgrades. Next slide, please. Now, friends, let's look at a very high level some of the key design objectives for the data architecture. Starting with the scalability. Now, scalability, of course, is to ensure that resources are made available by the architecture in the form of components, services, and the code libraries. They achieve acceptable performance and the throughput with increasing data loads. Resiliency, basically principles guiding establishment of system robustness, fault tolerance and data recovery from abnormal usages or disruptions. Security, we spoke about this. Metadata, the definitions need to be very clearly defined. Data representations in terms of the business terms, logical, physical, XML, modeling standards, etc. Data dependency mapping is imperatively required, which would include identification of consumers and producers of the data and authoritative sources. Data access, basically common data services, applicable information exchange standards, standard methods for point-to-point data transit and bulk data movement, etc. Critical data, elements for which the platform is an authoritative source, trusted source, or a system of record. Justification is important in terms of for data set duplication across the system wherever it is applicable, and data distribution would primarily entail internal and external data provisioning, requesting and approving the access restrictions, distribution models, for example, push and pull, publishing and subscribing, ownership and authority, and regulatory authority and audit. Next slide, please. Now let's further look at some of the key components of data architecture. First, let's look at the key requirement of data architecture. Data architecture, for that matter, refers to the design and the structure of an organization's data assets and data management resources. So it eventually defines how data is collected, stored, integrated, processed, and used across the enterprise. So you can think of it as something like a blueprint for managing data, something very similar to how building architecture provides a blueprint for constructing a building. So the key components of data architecture are starting with the data models. There could be conceptual models, logical models, physical models that define the entities, relationships, and storage structures. Then, of course, data storage and platforms, which would entail databases, data warehouses, data lakes, and cloud storage, etc. Data integration and movement, typically ETL or ELT pipelines, data streaming, APIs for moving data across the systems. Data governance and security. We spoke about this. This is primarily the policies for data quality, privacy, compliance, and access control. Metadata management, as you mentioned, would basically entail catalogs, lineage, and the definitions for understanding and tracking data. And lastly, data consumption layer. This is very important. Eventually, it culminates into the BI tools, the analytics platforms, the AI or machine learning systems that eventually use the data. Next slide, please. So we spoke about data model. Now, what is a data model? Data model is essentially a conceptual framework that defines how data is structured, stored, and accessed within a system. It primarily provides a blueprint for organizing data and the relationship between different data elements. So a data model typically describes the entities. Entities are basically the objects or the things that want to store data about, for example, the customer data, the product data, etc. Then data model describes the attributes, like what are the properties of those entities, like customer name, product price, etc. And then eventually, of course, the relationships, how those entities relate to each other. Like, when a customer places an order, what is the sequence and what are the ways relationships. So, why are data models important? Data model basically ensures consistency and integrity of data, facilitates communication between business and technical teams, and it guides database design and data governance. The various types of data models, the conceptual model, the logical models, the physical models, and some of the common modeling approaches are like relational model, hierarchical model, network model, object-oriented model, document models. I mean, this is too short a time to discuss the details, but the whole idea is to give you a glimpse of the significance and some of the high-level examples of data models. Next slide, please. Friends, now organizational data capability. These are some of the key elements of organizational data capability. CMMI data model gives a good level of detail around this in terms of the adoption guidelines and how the process maturity eventually evolves. So, one of the key elements of the data capability is, of course, the data management approach, which defines the overall strategy, policies, and practices, etc. Data architecture, we discussed that. Data management function, which establishes the roles and responsibilities and processes, and the data glossary. We'll be looking at this in a short while. This is the core of organization's data infrastructure. It is a standardized vocabulary that ensures consistent understanding and usage of data terms across the enterprise. Next slide, please. So, data management as a function, typically an organization should establish a dedicated data management function to oversee all the data management activities. This includes preparing, planning, and executing the data management activities for data analytics, for data quality, then, of course, the target data architecture and shared data repositories. I must say that whenever there is a reference of the repositories, one of the core practice areas, asset development is one of the practice areas of CMMI, which goes hand in hand with all the repositories. Enterprise data warehousing, content management, consolidation of the data stores, which again goes hand in hand with the process asset development, data audit, data migrations, data management, process development and implementation, process automation, and data risk or opportunity analysis. Again, the data risk or opportunity analysis goes hand in hand with the risk and opportunity management. Again, one of the core practice areas of CMI model. Next slide, please.
And Mr. Teenu, if I can please jump in, sorry to interrupt, but we are getting very close to running out of time. So I've got some really solid questions in the Q&A. So if you could please bring us to a close, and for those that are eager for more information, we'll be following up with phone calls and emails to schedule some time where we'd be happy to give more information about CMMI data.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. So, do I have about 3 minutes to wrap up before we take up the questions?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So friends, data glossary, very briefly, this basically entails the standard business terms, naming conventions, and metadata terminologies. Data and metadata relationships is driven by the data governance. It's the core of the data infrastructure, as already mentioned, and it supports an effective sharing of the data assets. Next slide, please.
I'm coming to this slide in terms of tying the knots,
Awesome, Shankaran, Dr. Shankaran. I was about to say this again. I think probably this slide says it all. If we tie it all, we talk in terms of the data elements, data sets, data assets, data glossary, data dictionary, data models, business rules and logic, data stores, data repositories, metadata repositories, data layers, data analytics, and eventually the data technology stack. Now, maybe if I have to, maybe another 2 minutes, probably we can elaborate the points that we could not discuss earlier, probably starting with the data technology stack. Data technology stack would primarily be the set of platforms, tools, and technologies used for data storage, processing, and management. Then when we say data layer, this is primarily the foundational architecture enabling data access, integration, and interoperability across the systems. And talking about the data rules and logic, basically the defined principles that govern how data is processed, validated, and interpreted. Typically, business rules would entail the data behavior. For example, say a customer age cannot be more than 18, or the business policies say a customer discount cannot be more than 30% of the product price, or validation, like email address must contain the character at the rate, or the standardization, say the data format has to be DDMMYY. And then if we talk about the data dictionary, as I mentioned, it is a detailed catalog describing data elements, their attributes, and relationships for technical references. Data glossary, we already spoke about a standardized vocabulary. So I guess, yeah, in the interest of time, I think, we could give a high level perspective. So probably I think we can now address the questions to take it forward.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Teenu. Thank you, Dr. Sankaran. Fantastic presentation, really informative, and a lot of good tidbits there. I'm very sorry that we're out of time. But so I've got about 12 questions here. So the first one that I'd like to present is what is an effective way that I can use CMMI data to prepare for AI adoption at my organization?
Sure. I think CMI data is going to be extremely critical to benchmark the enterprise level and operation level data management practices because, as we all keep hearing this, for AI, garbage in, garbage out. So data is going to be the raw material. And the challenges with regard to AI metrics that currently we are seeing increasingly in the industry, data drift, model drift, and conceptual drift. And with these drifts taking place, obviously the outputs of AI becomes a big question mark of how much they are reliable and dependable. Therefore, in that context, benchmarking every aspect of data which is going in as an input to AI, CMI for data can help in putting together enterprise level capability in how do we look at the data, keep monitoring the data, how AI is learning from our own data, and therefore giving a value-oriented outcomes. To that extent, benchmarking organization practices CMI for data will be extremely useful and, in fact, extremely critical in the current context, in the future context, Chris.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Sankaran. And because we are over time, we can do one more question. There were a few versions of this question, which is, can you provide an example for perhaps both gentlemen can weigh in? Can you provide an example of the type of impact that was recently able to be implemented with CMMI data and the effect that it had at the organization?
Sure. Now, at this point in time from KPMG, we have still not completed one full-blown CMI data appraisal. However, we are seeing some of these principles are being used by a few companies. They are yet to go for a formal appraisal, which will happen most probably by 2026 later part. But as of now, whatever they are adapting, what we could see with the specific example is one word, which I think one of the CEO actually mentioned in the company, alignment. There is a business objectives which talks about customer satisfaction score, net promoter score, word of mouth index, customer lifetime value, CLV, many business metrics. And then there are operational metrics also. Now, operation metrics is in one side of the lane and the business objectives progress another side of the lane. If that way, suddenly the organization will realize that we are now collecting so many data, but are they all needed? Are we really connecting the dots? This is where CMI data actually helped. In fact, as heard from the CIO of the company who said that CMI actually enabled by saying business objectives, and there is something called measurement and performance objectives, and then we have quality and cross performance objectives. It tied the knots of operational and business enterprise together. While there was also a question talking about data management is completely operational, it can be operation. Obviously, there has to be alignment back to the business. That's one striking benefit leadership team says. No, we do a predictable delivery, and we want to take informed decisions, quantitative early warning system in place. With all of these, can we use this internally looking at data management architecture? As Teenu talked about, variety of architecture. With all these architecture, are we able to see the benefit that is going back to the customers? In fact, some of these companies are going back to their external customers to say, what is likely to happen in the next 2 to 3 months of the project. Therefore, how we need to be prepared with. To that extent, the companies are seeing benefits, but just the initial scratching the surface of adapting CMI data. I'm hoping that by the time when we complete the appraisal, we'll see a lot more visibility and insights in terms of what specific benefits they would have seen. Teenu, you want to add anything specific to this point?
No, absolutely, Dr. Shankar, you covered very well. Just to reiterate that data would help both in the preventive and the reactive measures. Both are equally important, and eventually it's the data quality that eventually makes all the difference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sankaran. Thank you, Mr. Teenu. That is extremely valuable, and I really appreciate the answers. And I know that there's a lot of questions that are still going unanswered. So to today's listeners, please look for an email or a call from folks at CMMI and ISACA, our parent company, because we'd love to chat with you and give you an opportunity to implement this capability for your organization. That brings us to the end of the call. So once again, thank you to our wonderful presenters, and thank you to everybody who participated and was a part of this call. We hope that you found it useful and enjoyable, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you in order to enhance your capability, maturity in the future. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you. Thank you, Teenu.